Good evening, everyone. I'm your host, Jason Miles, and welcome to another episode of This is Revolution podcast. Sadly, once again, I am stuck without internet and attempting to do this show using my phone as a hotspot here in Mexico, where I was informed today, after I did go to my internet service provider, that there were multiple thieves of the fiber optic cable on different sides of town. That, coupled with a fire, is causing for an internet outage in my area. I was told it was supposed to be back up today. It is not. So hopefully we can get through this show and the champagne room hiccup free. But by my side to help me out if we do have any issues is the trusty voice of reason, M. Toussaint.
Hello. How are you today?
I don't know, anticlimactic like that intro without the applause, right?
It is weird. I was waiting for it.
I hate it. Yeah, I hate it. I hate it.
I like your little outfit today.
I'm dressing for the weather.
You do look like an extra from the Michael Jackson Bad video. You look ready to dance in the train station. Looks very nice.
Whose side do I look like I'm on? Do I look like I'm on Wesley Snipes' side or Michael Jackson's side?
Ooh, good question. I'm gonna go with Michael. I assumed Michael in the first place.
Because of the kerchief?
Maybe. The kerchief is a little buried, but it is there.
The kerchief is just for the kerchief is literally just for the lapel mic. That's all it's for.
Right.
Why did you say it like that? So mean. Right.
I'm agreeing.
Sure it is. Are you ready to talk Minneapolis politics and possibly the future vice president?
Yes. I'm calling dibs on the first question.
Did you add a question to the list of questions?
Nope. I made it up with my brain smarts.
But to the list of questions that I already had?
No, I didn't add it.
Oh, you didn't add it because you were just going to be that difficult?
Yeah, pretty much.
As long as people can see this level of difficulty that we deal with here. I try to have order, and she's just like, nope, chaos.
Yeah,
peeing all over it. Yeah, just like a toddler. As the dust settles from the latest presidential debate, one narrative has remained clear. The Republican Party is steadfast in its strategy of smearing Kamala Harris and her running mate Tim Walz as far-left radicals. Recently, J.D. Vance claimed that under Walz's leadership as governor of Minnesota, he defunded the police and allowed rioters to wreak havoc in the streets. Yet, as Eamon Whalen points out in his article for Mother Jones, Tim Walz was no protest leader. Wherever you are watching or listening to the show, there's links in the description to the article. I believe Toussaint's already put it in the chat. This portrayal of Walz is far from accurate. Rather than being a progressive icon, Walz governed in a manner more aligned with the establishment politics. As Whalen explains in his article, Walz responded to the unrest in the wake of the George Floyd's murder, not by leading a movement of racial justice, but by calling in the National Guard to suppress the protests, speaking in the feel your pain language that we come to see so often from the Democratic Party in these instances. In fact, then President Donald Trump praised Walz's firm response to the protests, undermining the claim that he represents any radical break from the Democratic Party's centrist trajectory. Despite this, Walz has been touted as a progressive alternative to the status quo, largely due to the work of Minnesota's left-leaning legislative body, which has overshadowed his more moderate approach. So is Walz truly a progressive leader, or has he simply benefited from the political climate of a progressive state? We'll dive into the protests that defined 2020, Walz's role in managing the response, and how he has ascended to the national stage as Harris's vice presidential pick. Please welcome our guest, coming all the way live from my old stomping grounds. Please welcome Eamon Whalen.
Thank you.
Sorry.
It's good to be back.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you go. You go.
Okay, no, it's definitely good to see you back on the show. You look meticulously groomed today, not just for a leftist.
He looks like
you got to beat the neck.
He looks like he's got a.
You know,
Eamon looks like he's got a really good hip hop vinyl collection of like records you haven't heard, Toussaint, from 91 to 97.
That's right.
Like I believe in my soul, those books are just like a Batman facade. And if you pull one of the books down, you go down the fireman's thing pole, and then that's when all the vinyl is there, and then all the 90s rappers are there to
last time I was on the
danger.
Last time I was on the show, we were talking rap, so
we were.
I wanted to shit on Mos Def in the champagne room, so if you want to
well, it's gonna be fun.
I actually feel he's aged the most gracefully, perhaps, out of any of that generation. But that's another conversation. For the
sure, but I believe I have a clip that really shows you who he really is.
Okay, all right.
The real Mos Def. Will you please stand up? And he stood up. He stood up and he saluted in the most. Yeah, we'll leave it alone.
Oh dear. No.
What if Mos Def is watching this show right now?
Yes. This is the show you guys recommended for me. Yeah. Sorry, Mos. Yassine. Sorry.
Yes, sorry, Yassine. Never liked that guy.
Well, I wanted to ask you right out the gate, is Tim Walz your dad?
That's actually really cool. That's funny that you say that because my dad's name is Tim.
Oh.
And his last name starts with a W.
That's right, Tim W.
And you know, like in the same way that a lot of people are seeing their maybe like ideal type of a Midwestern dad, like there are part, you know, a little bit reminds me, I guess, like a white guy that grew up in the Midwest, and you know, my dad is good with tools and fixing things and such, but no, he is not my dad.
He's not your dad. Well, I know that I'm a New Yorker, and I know that during the pandemic, Andrew Cuomo came to like national prominence, and it was just so weird, the response to him. People were calling themselves Cuomo-sexuals, and I'm like,
yes,
that guy?
Yeah.
So, like, how do you feel seeing Tim Walz being celebrated in this way? He's everyone's dad, including yours.
Yeah, it was a funny news cycle where I could understand it came off pretty goofy to people who I think have paid attention to his trajectory, but I could also understand why people were that narrative was built. But I felt like it was a very internet based narrative that picked up over a couple weeks. But it was a very odd thing where the Veep stakes were happening. He became the left wing pick, like he was the left's pick, and then big sort of like accounts, people formerly known or formerly affiliated with Bernie or something, were saying we want Walz as opposed to Josh Shapiro, the more sort of like corporate. And so then it became, and then people were then saying Walz just had this historic legislative session in Minnesota in the state house where they passed all of these bills that some of which are like Bernie, you could say Bernie Sanders light, or even Bernie type bills, universal school lunch. That's kind of the big one. And then it became, but like, I wouldn't have described Walz as a progressive. During his primary, he was the centrist candidate in 2018. He had a progressive challenger named Aaron Murphy, who's the Senate Majority Leader in the Minnesota House. And he picked his Lieutenant Governor, Peggy Flanagan, who is an Indigenous woman, might become the first Indigenous governor, as a sort of throwing a bone to the left, you know? And then when he got picked, it became this thing like Jonathan Chait in New York Mag writing that like Harris needs to tack to the center because she picked this leftist where it seemed like he was just getting that from his timeline. Like, I didn't understand. Like he's like like it just became such a insular kind of like internet media, what kind of media influencers are for him, that it just was like, if you pay attention to how he's governed, he has, I would say, exceeded the expectations and done a sort of rare thing amongst politicians where he's maybe moved left as his career has progressed, partly because he was a congressman for southern Minnesota in a red district, and he never had to govern the Twin Cities, which is a very blue and even left progressive place. Like we've Keith Ellison and Ilhan Omar, like the Minneapolis Congress people, like there have always been the left Democratic Party. So I think that created the perception, and it's not that it's totally untrue, but it's just like it is a caricature. It's less of a caricature than like JD Vance saying that he's like an Antifa wielding, or sorry, an Antifa Molotov cocktail wielding militant, or people saying that he's like Chairman Mao because he has been to China a lot. But it still was like, it was inaccurate if you're an actual, like, someone paying attention to politics in Minnesota over Tim Walz's at least gubernatorial tenure.
You said in your article, you mentioned how Walz's handling of the 2020 protests in Minnesota contradicted his portrayal as a left-leaning reformer. You write, Walz's administration was quick to crack down on the demonstrations, deploying the National Guard and imposing curfews. The image of a progressive protest leader quickly dissolved as his actions aligned more with the forces of order. How do you see this affecting his appeal to the left now that he's on the national ticket with Kamala? Or do you think that most people are just going to ignore that moment anyway?
I think people mostly ignore it. I don't know if you all feel this way, but I tend to think that a lot of what happened in 2020, especially in that first week after George Floyd was murdered, where the most unrest and property damage and buildings on fire and quote unquote rioting was happening, like that has largely been forgotten with the exception of the right and then maybe sort of more kind of anarchist insurrectionary leaning leftists. Otherwise, most people just try to push that under the rug like it didn't happen, which I think is pretty interesting, and kind of it neglects like a really fascinating phenomenon where a ton of like unaffiliated apolitical normies were really, really mad and were ready to like burn shit down, which I think is a really interesting thing to think about it in that time. But yeah, I don't necessarily think, like, I think he basically triangulated, like, as I was saying before, whereas he knew he needs to retain suburban support, but he also can't look like he's cracking down too hard. But he kind of ended up doing that. But I would say to think of him, the best way to think of him is that he's a savvy politician who triangulates. And unlike a lot of other triangulators, and this is maybe partly due to the climate that he was in, he's not super outwardly antagonistic towards the electoral left, I should say. Like, like he has, like, the minority whip in the Minnesota State House, if I'm remembering this correctly, is a DSA member. He's got multiple out socialists in his caucus, like State Senator Omar Fateh, for example, who is behind some of the more kind of ambitious legislation. So, yeah, I don't really think it will affect it too much, but that's definitely, it soured some people in Minneapolis towards Walz. But at the same time, I think people are kind of holding two truths, in that if they care about the presidential election, that yes, he probably was the most progressive pick, but also he's done a lot of things that progressives in Minnesota have not liked.
I mean, do you think he's more progressive than someone like Gavin Newsom?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I don't know as much about the California legislature, but like what the context that informs sort of this like historic session that happened is that for many years, Minnesota had the only split house in the country, the only state house that the Republicans controlled the Senate, Democrats controlled the House. So there was a gridlock. I mean, that also, like, Walz they did pass something during his first term, like he was working with the Senate Majority Leader of the Republicans, but they got all of this in 2020 or in 2022. They got a majority, but a 1-vote majority, largely due to like the Dobbs effect, like them gaining seats in the suburbs due to Roe being overturned. So they had a 1-seat majority with a fairly ideologically diverse Democratic caucus, and they passed a ton of things. So in that sense, I don't think that a Gavin Newsom or like a someone in New York or someone in a deep blue state that does not have that has never experienced that gridlock, there's a sense of like urgency and like this is our only chance. And for that, I think he does deserve credit, even if he maybe didn't run on a lot of that program and just signed some bills, vetoed some other key bills that we can talk about. But he controlled and was at the head of a very, very ambitious legislative session that I think in other states, maybe the governor is concerned with sort of defeating the left, whereas Minnesota Democrats couldn't afford to do that if they wanted to pass anything.
What was the feeling on the ground when all this was going on? I don't remember as much being said about Tim Walz as I remember the city council kind of being at the forefront of saying things like we're going to abolish the police early on. And then the mayor, of course, was the ire for a lot of people. As far as Tim Walz, what was the feeling on the ground? Were people like, let's get rid of the governor as well? Or is that where his playing politics and, as you say, triangulation comes into play?
I would say the ire and the if a politician was the target of people or people were really mad, it would be Jacob Frey, partly because the response and a lot of the violence towards protesters and the over the top response was from the MPD. It wasn't from the National Guard. Things were like not all the way, but like kind of calmed down by the time the National Guard got there, and then it was just sort of them occupying. But then before that, it was a MPD plus a consortium of other police forces that had come in town, whether that was like state troopers or something to that effect, where but at a certain point it became hard to tell which was which. But the thing that Walz has been attacked for is that he basically didn't step in to sort of wrest control of the situation of the response from Jacob Frey and the chief of police in Minneapolis, who had no like handle on the situation at all and were very I guess just like lacked any kind of like solid leadership and seemed like they had no control over the police department. And so then Walz basically, the back and forth goes, and this debate I think is like, it's been hashed out a lot in recent media reports. I didn't go into it too much, but basically Jacob Frey requests the National Guard, and he says that Walz hesitates because he wasn't quite sure whether it would, it was a good idea to bring them in yet. Walz denies that, and he says that you guys weren't following the proper protocol to call in the National Guard. Who really knows? It just feels like it's two politicians who want to distance themselves from an unpopular issue that both of them, I think, didn't see coming, but were warned was going to happen. Like both Walz was warned by Philando Castile's mom, that I just learned in this really, really good Washington Post report.
That was interesting. Yes, very interesting in that, dude. That can I just say something for a second?
Please.
That blew my mind. That blew my mind because for me, the Philando Castile situation was one of those that for me hit close to home because I am a regular cat that doesn't have a lot of money. I did pay for my tags, but for some reason I don't have them yet. I don't like driving in certain parts of the bay. I'm older now, and I think I don't get pulled over like I used to before the gray really started coming through on the beard. But there's a different approach law enforcement has with someone they know that has literally no power. You're going to get fucked up if they want to fuck you up. And Philando Castile is one of those cats that really, paid the price on a very innocuous traffic stop. And to even go so far as to know exactly the protocol and how you talk to law enforcement during getting pulled over and going to reach for your permit, and the cat opening fire with a child in the car. It was I had never seen anything so blatant of, you really shouldn't be a cop if you're this afraid of everybody around you. And I didn't see the outrage from America. And there's a whole bunch of reasons why George Floyd is George Floyd and 2020 is 2020 and 2018 was not 2020. But for Philando Castile's mom to kind of plant that seed and say, there's something happening right now, and you really need to get a hold on this. And this was even before her son was killed.
This was after her son was killed. Before,
it was after? Okay, sorry.
Before Walz was governor. When Walz,
okay.
So Walz was not governor when Philando Castile was killed, which did actually, after like big protests were outside the Minnesota governor's mansion with, it was the previous Democratic governor. And definitely both, as I say in my piece, like years starting in 2015 with the police killing of a Black man named Jamar Clark in North Minneapolis that led to a police precinct occupation that kind of was setting the stage for the 2020 precinct siege. But like from Jamar Clark to Philando Castile and several others, it had definitely upended city and state politics and made that, like, protests had made that a big issue. And I think Walz, in preparing to be governor, was trying to educate himself on that issue. And there's this Washington Post article. It's by the Robert Samuels, the reporter who wrote the biography of George Floyd, and he's very, very well sourced. He talks about a sort of group of Black women who were family members of victims of police violence, and Walz had sort of built a relationship with them. And yeah, the most Valerie Castile, Philando's mom, had warned him that if this happens again, like something more explosive could happen. And also Jacob Fry had been warned that, and he admitted so much in a New York Times interview, I think like a week after he said that he had been warned that was going to happen. So I think neither of them wanted to be the face of George Floyd, Minnesota, Minneapolis, and they were trying to shift the blame onto one another, basically.
It was crazy because in reading that, and you had mentioned another police killing that happened during the Derek Chauvin trial, correct?
Yeah. So that is what I really wanted to get across in my article, which I felt was, or at least one of the key points that I wanted to raise, that I felt like I could be useful in this discourse, because everyone was bringing up everyone. I mean, people were responding to JD Vance and Trump and the right making this attack on Walz that was obviously in bad faith, obviously a lie. Like, we saw that the audio came out of Trump that you mentioned at the beginning, that he compliments his approach. But they found it to be politically useful to sort of remind people of 2020, Minneapolis burning. This guy is feckless and weak. They want to portray the Democrats as weak. But what no one was talking about, because it wasn't politically useful to Republicans or Democrats, was what happened in 2021 in Minneapolis, where the Derek Chauvin trial is happening, and Walz and law enforcement leaders around the state have announced, in the weeks leading up to the trial, they said, we're going to have this multi-jurisdictional law enforcement initiative called Operation Safety Net. which, you know, it's like sounds kind of dystopian, but it's like to basically what happened in 2020 cannot happen again. That was like the sort of message sent. They even had police coming in from Nebraska and Ohio to sort of, and
That
they
was
had
crazy when you wrote that. Yeah.
they had the National Guard sort of pre-occupying the city. So this is all in anticipation of a not guilty verdict in the Chauvin trial. And then in the middle of the trial, in a suburb that is just north of Minneapolis called Brooklyn. God, is it Brooklyn Park or Brooklyn Center? I'm forgetting. There are two suburbs right next to each other.
Brooklyn, is it Brooklyn Heights? Or
No,
Brooklyn
no, no.
Park?
Brooklyn.
I think it's Brooklyn Center.
Brooklyn Center. I'm sorry. That was embarrassing as a Minneapolis resident. But in Brooklyn Center, a kid named Dante Wright is pulled over and shot and killed. He's pulled over for a air freshener. The police officer thinks that she's reaching for her taser. That's her defense. Shoots and kills him. And so the law enforcement response is already there for a response to a not guilty Chauvin verdict. And all of the national media is already in Minneapolis reporting on the trial, like more journalists than you'd ever see somewhere. And everyone goes to the Brooklyn Center police station. And then there's another standoff outside of another police station after another police killing in Minnesota. And it is a very, very heavy-handed response. Journalists are detained. Journalists are like told, God, I forget, they were like told to go home. And I was there as like I was a freelancer. I didn't have any proper credentials. And I was more scared in that setting than I was at any point during 2020. Even though that was arguably like a crazier situation, there was a sense like that they were going to come with sort of overwhelming force to prevent another 2020 from happening. And Walz was then after that admitted that it was a failure, and that the way that media was treated especially was completely unacceptable. There was an apartment complex across the street from the police station, and they shot so much tear gas that people in that apartment complex were affected and were having health issues. And there was kids that were affected by the tear gas to move people out. And so, but no one in this partisan war of an election it's not useful to anyone, because Democrats don't want to talk about that. About Walz doing exactly what Republicans want, with a very heavy-handed response, and Republicans don't want to talk about that because Walz is doing what they would want to do. So that was something that I wanted to introduce because it was missing. And I interviewed a couple people, including the mayoral candidate in 2021 in Minneapolis, who was an abolitionist from that movement. And, she said it's laughable. It's ridiculous to say that Walz is some kind of like ally of protest movements, and that he, after George Floyd, what he actually really did was build a police superpower rather than try to rein in or improve protest response in a more like humane way that wouldn't potentially aggravate, so.
You were there when all that was going on, and I think this is where we started communicating, was during this time of protest. Because for me, watching it was really interesting, because as a California native, one of the things that we think about when we think about the 90s and hip hop and uprisings is the riots that follow the Rodney King verdict, and how iconic certain images are of that era, the amount of money and damage it caused to that area, and how that area has changed even to this day in Southern California. Now, there was also a ridiculous amount of damage done in Minneapolis during this time. And to your point, I agree with you wholeheartedly, right, that a lot of people that are involved are apolitical, but there's a lot going on. And the Trump era, maybe this is, I don't want to speak for Philando Castile's mom, but maybe this is what she's getting at. There's a mood in that moment where we're afraid of this idea of authoritarianism. And there is a lot of coverage of these shootings, right? It's if it leads, it bleeds is one thing, which isn't 100% true. But there's a certain kind of bleeding that leads to a certain kind of leading. And when people of color are killed by law enforcement, and it's happening during a Trump regime where he just feels very, very comfortable being so racist in his public statements, it did give you a certain feeling. I mean, did you feel that way as well, Toussaint, during that time in New York?
What do you mean?
I mean, cops in New York suck already. You didn't really need
Yes,
Trump to
they
know
do.
that, but did it feel like there was a powder keg even in your city that one thing could go sideways and it's going to blow up into a South Central / Watts type riot for you as well?
There's definitely feelings at certain protests that if one person throws a bottle, it's just going to be set off.
Mm-hmm.
It's just going to be set off.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so yeah, we'll say like to bring up LA is that I think Minneapolis is the second, next to LA in 92 is the second most amount of destruction caused by like one period of civil unrest in America, or at least in recent American history. I think more, or maybe since 92. That's what I want to say.
I could see that. I could see that
because there was 68 and those long hot summers and such. But I mean, you guys have had Vincent Bevins on here talking about his book, like and I reference it. I interviewed him and I hyperlink it to the piece where I say it's like the iron law of 21st century protests is that there's an inciting incident, there's protests, police crack down with like over the top asymmetrical response. Videos of that spread like wildfire, and next thing you know, the next day the streets are double the amount of people, and you just sort of rinse and repeat until it reaches like a fever pitch where people are burning down a police station. And so I think that is like in the simplest way you could think of it like that. But I do also the further away I get, and this is just I think from the benefit of perspective and hindsight, at the time it was hard to know. Like I went back to like what I was writing at the time, and I did write like this probably has to do with COVID, but it's like the more time passes, I'm like COVID had a lot to do with the level.
Yes. Yes.
And Trump and COVID and it feeling like it was like destitute, like shit's already seeming like what is happening with the world. There's such an uncertainty. We have this like authoritarian president who seems like he doesn't care about like Americans like well-being. Like I don't know if I think it was maybe just as the sort of like pandemic unemployment was like about to kick in. But it just, I think it was, people were so on edge that it was like a powder keg that I don't think you can recreate. I could be wrong, but I don't know.
I agree.
I don't think you can.
I agree.
Without a certain level of deprivation of the average person and an elimination of all potential distractions. You know?
Yes.
I've never seen a perfect moment like that for that to happen other than 92.
Yeah.
My thing is, I feel like with 92, it's looked at as this moment that we always look at for so many bad reasons, and we don't understand their bad reasons, right? Like 92 soon ushers in the 94 crime bill. 92 is a lot of respectability politics is the reason why this happened. You know, these fatherless Negroes,
right,
and all these illegals. That's really the problem. The conservatism in the 90s, I think we forget. And for 2020, it seems to be quite the opposite, right? Because everyone's talking about the problem is wayward law enforcement, and we need to just get rid of them because there's nothing you can do with them, and just abolish this whole system of law enforcement, because all they're ever going to do is just ravage poor Black people. And it felt like as soon as all the people that positioned themselves got what they wanted, either political positions or foundation money, more so the foundation side, then 2020 now is this moment that we forget. If you were to ask the average person, what's 2020? Only someone that's predominantly online, which is a very small section of society, would maybe say George Floyd summer.
Yeah.
There's so many other things people might even think about. They might say COVID, but they're definitely not going to say George Floyd summer and these protests and my Netflix having black cinema suggestion as I turn it on. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, or people that were like involved in it, but even that sometimes, like there was a lot of people that summer. I mean, the numbers bear it out, where it was like more people protesting, than have in like the history of America before, more people at the street at the same time. And that's like a lot of people going to their first protest. And it's hard to know like what meaning people made of that at the time. And I've been kind of shocked at how easily it's been memory hold. But I guess that's sort of like the way things go now. Like Trump was almost assassinated, and that's barely even a footnote anymore.
It's no one talks about that.
That's crazy. Crazy.
We're witnessing Tucson. I don't know how you feel about this. I go on about this way too much.
Mm-hmm.
And again, thank you, Eamon, for taking the time to come and talk with us. Wherever you're watching or listening to this show, there's links in the description to Eamon's piece. The assassination attempt on Donald Trump could have been catastrophic, if you kind of think about it. He's a very divisive figure. And that could have played into so many people's tinfoil hat theories on how they see the world, which again, all this stuff really gets ramped up in the 2016 election. Like the post-Obama moment, coupled with the rise of Trump, or right-wing populism, if that's what you want to call it, because it's not just here. There is a global phenomenon of right-wing populism around this same time, and conspiracy theory to the point where we're rehashing through QAnon debunked conspiracy theories like the satanic panic and everyone's a child molester. And then the greatest thing to ever happen for everyone that says, I read this on X website, ergo I'm an expert, is Jeffrey Epstein and his death. So we're talking about this moment. I don't know if it could ever happen again. I don't want it to ever happen again. But a lot goes into 2020 that isn't just, sadly, the life and death of a man named George Floyd, even though we call it that. I think he is the straw ultimately, because he's not the only person killed that year. Right. That was a big time killing, right? Breonna Taylor was a big killing. Ahmaud Arbery was a big killing that I can think of off the top of my head. I don't know if there's any more than that.
Those were the kind of the big ones that at the time I think people were talking about. But yeah, I mean, I think that, but I also think that is historically true of most rebellions, urban rebellions in American history, is that they're almost always catalyzed by a act of police violence, but they are always about something much bigger than that act of police violence, and about what a community has been going through, and it's a straw that broke the camel's back situation. And I think there had been big protests that almost spiraled out of control in Minneapolis before, in that preceding decade. But I think it was, like you said, this like perfect situation with yet another police killing, a populace in Minneapolis that was fairly experienced in protesting, or like experienced with that response, with a ton of people that were newly, whatever you want to call, radicalized or mobilized to get out on the streets. And so, yeah, I think I do. Yeah. And I do think that it's true, is that it was a lot more about this guy, this one fairly regular guy named George Floyd in Minneapolis, but it was about much more, but that's always kind of how it has been with these sorts of explosions in American history, and just like broadly, like the thing that kicked off the Arab Spring in Tunisia. It was the
Yeah.
vendor self-immolating that is sort of like a catalyst for broader protest explosion. So I think that's true, but has kind of always been true. But maybe
So I'm assuming
the level to which he has been made a martyr by media and like the NGO apparatus, that could be different. I was born in 91, so I wasn't. I don't quite have as much of
Rodney King, unlike George Floyd, Rodney King lived.
Right.
And what makes Rodney King kind of a forgettable figure for some, and even a joke, because you were born in 91, so you don't remember this, especially in the urban spaces, we'll call them urban spaces. The joke was Rodney King spoke.
Right.
He was like Michael Jackson in the 90s. People forget Michael Jackson didn't speak. Never really did interviews. If he did, it was real quick. He had sunglasses on. He was cool, and he was out. And not George Floyd, Rodney King spoke. He didn't want to speak. And what he had just witnessed, kind of in his name, really fucked him up.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, when you watch him speak, he's nervous.
Can't we all just get along?
That's what people remember about that. But he also talks about seeing a dead man in front of him.
Oh, wow.
And he's like, people are, and then also people forget, like Reginald Denny and the other gentleman that was pulled out of a truck and beat up. That was a lot to witness and witness that all in your name.
Right.
It wasn't like he felt vindicated in this, because these people don't know him. They don't know what he wants out of this. They don't know how he feels about this.
Yeah.
And there's people that knew him through rehab and have told me, and this is all anecdotal, they've told me that he was such a gentle person and kind of a soft-spoken man. And you take this guy, you put him in front of cameras, and he became fodder for every comedian. Everybody is stuck in 1968. They wanted him to have a dashiki on and a black fist and say all the things that they wanted to hear. And you didn't get that out of this very timid, large man. And you forget for a moment, you know him not because of the words he's written or because of the protests he's led. You know him because he got his ass whooped. Remember that. You know him because he got his ass whooped. Why do you want him? Why does he need to be your spokesperson, first and foremost? And the backlash he got really effed him up mentally, and he, kind of fell into addiction. I believe he died of an overdose. George Floyd doesn't get that because he never got to speak. So he can be anything you want him to be. And everybody got to project on to George Floyd and that moment everything they wanted.
Yeah, I mean, it's like George. Right. There's George Floyd.
No,
there's
please.
Floyd the symbol, and there's George Floyd the man, and those are kind of two different things. I think a great piece of journalism that sort of explores this question and this division between someone's like the martyr for racial justice that he became, and the symbol about unjust policing in America that he became, versus the just guy that he was again, same reporter, Robert Samuels in the Washington Post, did a profile of George Floyd's girlfriend, on and off girlfriend, who was not in the spotlight at all. And I think that the headline is sort of like, Floyd is my man, but George Floyd is a movement. And that kind of says it all,
Yeah.
And that there's a lot of ambivalence with her. She was also white, so it's like, and she didn't really know his family. And so then she wasn't really.
Weren't they both kind of methed out?
Not meth. I believe painkillers. They both had issues with that, and she was in the trial, And yeah, no, I thought it's a very well done, sensitively, like respectfully done profile of her, and the really tough kind of human story in that, like this guy versus this idea that has catalyzed the nation. So yeah, it's yeah, it's tough.
Do you think it was by design that people didn't know much about his girlfriend?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if design is the right. I think just by the circumstances of it, like the way it is written in the article is sort of she and him had an on again off again relationship, and then she is sort of because they sometimes use together, she sort of was, and I don't know if she had met his family before, so she's sort of an out of town girlfriend, white girl. Mm-hmm. They sort of affiliated with her with like a dark period in his life. So I just think that and I think also he made a concerted effort to sort of step back from the situation. I think probably for her own mental health as well. Like she didn't want to be a symbol, but then she has like in the years since, she's befriended this really amazing group called Family Supporting Families of Victims of Police Violence that's based in Minnesota, led by this woman, Toshira Garraway. That is it's a group, it's sort of a support group of families of victims of police brutality, that a lot of them that weren't like kind of big in the headlines ones. And she has been, I think, embraced by them and has gone to some of their events and has become sort of part of that community and support group. But yeah, I don't know. I can't really speculate whether it's by design, but I think it was by the sort of circumstances of the moment. But yeah, I definitely recommend people read that piece by Robert Samuels in the Post.
Are you going to write the definitive Mike Davis-like story of your hood?
Oh man,
from lovely California, a very in-depth doorstopper book that's going to talk about the history of Minneapolis and the St. Paul Sound and why Prince and the Time is the baddest MFs around, and the last city to really.
Oh man, you're not the first person who said that to me. It's definitely would be a big undertaking, but I do have. I've got some things cooking right now, longer form, sort of reflections on that will be at least the start of maybe a bigger project, but nothing is solidified yet. But I like the City of Courts. That's a big thing to try to match, but it would be very fun to do that.
You have to love where you're from to write that.
I was just sorry, say that again.
I said you have to love where you're from to write something like that, and I think you love where you're from.
Yeah, and I think moving away, I have some perspective on it now. But I was just gonna say, I was just home for a bit, and I saw Jimmy Jam perform with his dad, the 97-year-old jazz piano player that still plays out with a band and sings and is on the piano. And they did like this local journalist just wrote a biography of his dad, Cornbread Harris, and he's been playing since like the 50s, and him and Jimmy Jam were Jimmy Jam's on the keys and Cornbread Harris is on the piano. Yeah, they're I'm also surprised at just broadly speaking, the lack of big books, reflections on 2020. There's been some, like I've got, I have Cedric Johnson's book. There's another book called States of Incarceration. That's good. I interviewed the author of this book called The Minneapolis Reckoning, who's a professor of sociology at the University of Minnesota, who I think is the book is, if someone was going to ask me like what happened in 2020, I would give them that. But there's also like there's a lot more meat on the bone with what exactly happened and how to make sense of it. So yeah, I'll take that I'll take that as encouragement. We'll see.
I don't even know if people are going to remember Standing Rock.
Okay, so that leads me to another, I think, important thing to raise about Tim Walz that has also made me a little bit feel like I'm going insane. Is that in the sort of news cycle after he was selected, I saw 3 or 4 different articles in national publications, reputable even by some reporters I like, saying that Tim Walz was like a climate champion and that he was like this big environmentalist, where he basically had if there was a second Standing Rock in America, like since then, it was Line 3 in Minnesota in like 2021, in the summer of 2021. But they did a very good job studying Standing Rock and preventing that from happening again. There's a really good series on The Intercept I'd recommend everyone check out by a great journalist named Aline Brown she called it a corporate counterinsurgency, and how the oil company sort of defanged potential protest responses to this. But Tim Walz, so Line 3 was a oil pipeline that was corroding and that they were going to rebuild, but they were going to rebuild it to be several times bigger than it was before. And it was going to go across treaty protected land. Minnesota has a fairly sizable native population that have very generous treaties compared to a lot of other states. And Tim Walz, while he was running, he tweeted, "Any pipeline that goes across treaty land is a non-starter for me." And then he picked an indigenous lieutenant governor, and then did a couple like kind of pump the brakes, like they need to study more, but then let it go, let it rip. The pipeline was built, and the biggest scandal of that, or one of the bigger scandals of that, is that as part of their permit, Enbridge, the oil company, paid the overtime and for supplies for the protest suppression by the police, by Minnesota law enforcement. It was paid by the oil company. They were invoicing the oil company for all of their protest-related, civil disobedience-related response. The oil company was paying for that. And so that was like, you can't write about Tim Walz's climate record and not write about the biggest climate story of his entire career. And so that was just like, I don't know what, if people were on deadline and didn't do their homework, but it was really, it was starting to make me feel crazy that there wasn't even a to be sure, like a lot of the articles that are sort of writing about him in a positive light from the left, they do a sort of throat clearing. To be sure, he did this in 2020. I'm a journalist. I've done that before with things. Like, it's just part of the game. Sometimes you have to do that, and no one even did that. And so that's like, and again, this isn't to like make him into some, everyone's actually totally has it backwards and he's this big villain, but it's to say like, let's just be real about his record. Which I think the bar maybe has been lowered. I think people on the left are maybe really, really hungry for a win and what feels like a win. And it's sort of, I mean, you could argue it reflects some changes in priorities of the Democratic Party that select someone like Walz, someone who doesn't have an elite college background, didn't go to law school. Like, those are all things that.
Does that speak, though, to a certain aspect of left intelligentsia that is extremely PMC, that loves the veneer of working class aw shucksness, and like, you got to get the aw shucks guy in here, because look how aw shucks he is. All the proles will love it.
I think there's a little bit of that, yeah, and like a regional it's the Midwestern, it's the hunting, he hunts, he wears flannel, he's a football coach, he's very folksy, he's a good dad, he was a teacher, he's a National Guard, that's another thing to say when he called the National Guard. He himself was National Guard. And so in those statements, he started to sound a lot less like a fun Midwestern football coach and more like a National Guard sergeant or whatever his position was that he maybe had bended the truth about at certain points. But I do think, I do think you're right about that. But I also do think he does have some of those bona fides where he was his first time in Congress in 2006. Like, he did win a red district, and he had one pretty good in rural areas. But as things have polarized in America since then, and in Minnesota even, he has less and less support in his old congressional district as governor. And a lot of his support now comes from the Twin Cities and the Twin Cities suburbs, like every other Democrat. So yeah, I do think that there is some of that. Like, there's a little bit in the same way. I think people were really, really excited about Fetterman. Some of the similar thing, and that he breaks through this just by the nature of his self-presentation. He breaks through this sort of like cultural baggage that Democrats have. That is like you said, PMC, cities, turn your nose up at you. But we shouldn't overstate how well Walz does in, like, he's not like Andy Beshear, who's a Democrat who wins a state that is plus 26 for Trump. Minnesota's still like it still goes for Democrats. So he's not like doing some kind of crazy defying all odds as a Democrat in a red state. It's very much a blue with the right. 2016, it started to veer more into purple. And I think even with Biden on the ticket, Minnesota started to seem like it was it was in play, which is not a good sign. Minnesota hasn't gone up for a Republican since like the early 70s, I want to say. It's famously the only state that Walter Mondale won because he was from there.
Unlike
a lot of people don't know who Walter Mondale is watching the show right now. Yeah, he lost against Ronald Reagan. So take a look. Was it Reagan or Bush? I forgot. It was Reagan.
It was Reagan.
Yeah. Who ran against Bush? I don't remember.
Michael Dukakis.
Thank you.
I just watched the Lee Atwater documentary the other night, which I would highly recommend. The
one that was on Showtime?
I think it was on Showtime. I watched it. It's free on Tubi, but it's
it's on Tubi?
Yeah.
No more, fam.
Jason's favorite channel.
I'm like, damn, I'm gonna start looking at Tubi. But yeah, the Lee Atwater one is good. It interviews Michael Dukakis, and he is just like a husk of a man. He just looks like, because it goes through the whole Willie Horton thing, and Dukakis didn't respond. That was his like strategy. Is like, I'm not going to respond to this, and the rest was history.
He didn't want to end the program, which he thought was a decent program. And I'm sorry if you guys hear dogs barking. There's 2 rapey dogs behind me, and they're just so rapey. When I say that, people don't believe me. Like, what are you talking about? I was like, it's like a scene from the movie Penitentiary or Oz for you younger people. Every time there's the one dog that tries like, hello, and then the other one just shut up and just starts just fucking the shit out of him. You're like, whoa, it's not how anything is supposed to react.
Very not Tim Walz, very not wholesome, very not demure, very not sweet.
No, not demure at all. Not demure at all. See, they're barking right now. Fuck me, I was gonna ask you a question. I forgot. Were they up in the windows? Look, we've had Eamon on for long enough. And let's go to the champagne room. Are you going to join us in the champagne room?
I'm down.
We can talk the greatness of Minneapolis music. I feel like,
dude, did you read that New York Times article about the Prince documentary? that's like not gonna come out?
No.
All right,
Mm.
I did see that. I saw that it wasn't coming out. Yeah.
It's by the guy who made OJ Made in America, and it's 9 hours. And
Fuck
it's like,
that guy.
supposed to be like the best.
Wow.
Why? You know, like OJ? That's a great documentary.
Eh,
Oh man,
Eh.
I don't know. You should revisit it. I think it's great.
We need
I
to talk
watched it 3
about.
times.
We need to talk about Young Thug. He needs a documentary for his trial.
Yeah, rest in peace, Rich Homie Quan.
That's
That was
right.
Young Thug's partner, and just passed away last week. Very, very unfortunate. But yeah, happy to join you guys in the champagne room. Talk Young Thug, talk Prince, talk most.
Do you feel comfortable talking about Moors?
Moors?
Oh boy.
Mm-hmm.
Like Moor? Moor?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I'm educated enough.
Tucson, did you watch the video I sent you on the Moors?
Moorish science.
No. Is it the sovereign citizens or like the
yeah.
Oh.
I'm a little bit read up on that. I don't know if enough to talk with intelligence.
I didn't. It's fine. It's fine. Them people are so mad at me.
Oh,
well, not them people, but the Black Israelites got mad at me, and then I ran into them in San Francisco. You know they're right by Powell Street BART. Right. And they've asked for a while to come on, and I just can't. I can't. I've said no
Exactly.
a few times.
They're aware of your show?
The ones from the Bay, by the way.
And do they know? They know you from like they know you in person from like back in the day, kind of thing? Wow.
I don't know none of these niggas. And I'm walking. I was staying in Union Square a few months ago, and I was walking to BART to go see my son in Oakland. And as I'm walking to BART, I totally forgot. I forgot a couple of things. A, I have purposely pissed some people off. B, that's just the way I roll. And C, I forgot where the fuck I was. And I walked to Powell Street, and it's still early in the afternoon, and them cats is out there, yelling at white people.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm walking to you don't know what used to be the old Verizon building. And because I'm walking down Powell, literally down Powell, passing the turnaround for the fucking trolley. And I'm going down the stairs, and one of them hits the other one, and they point to me.
Oh my God.
And I thought to myself, yeah, well, sometimes them checks just got to get cashed. And I just kept walking, and I was like, if it's gonna happen, it's gonna happen. But I just gotta keep walking. I can't confront it.
What?
But they just left me alone.
How do they know who you are? Like they've like come at you online before?
They've never come at me. It's always been there's actually an air of professionalism, I would say. And I don't know how big their online presence is. Maybe I just don't see anything. But I've gotten messages pretty consistently, I would say, for the last, how long, Tucson? Like 2 years, maybe?
Yeah, about that.
At least a year and a half.
Wow.
Yeah, it was, somebody said, there you go. I've never had something feel like, and I was like, man, I actually talk all this, well, I do, and I feel a certain way. And I also feel like those cats, if they were to like run up on me, it wouldn't be to fuck me up. It would probably be to like confront me verbally.
Sure.
And I'm totally fine with that. You can talk about me and my mama. I really don't give a shit. Just please keep your weapons to yourselves. But yeah. DC Joe Black.
I walk that street so much. I'm just envisioning you walking through where that trolley is with all the,
because you know exactly what I'm talking about. It fucked me up. It fucked me up because if I see people I know in the city, which is really rare nowadays.
Yeah, I bet.
It's like, Jay, this wasn't Jay. This was
Damn. So it was just the point. There nothing else came of it. They didn't end up.
They didn't fuck with me. I maybe they thought I was someone else or whatever. I don't know. All I know is I should say never. That was a very uncomfortable feeling to have at that. Historically, Eamon was my favorite BART station. As a kid, growing up in Richmond, California, it was $4 round trip when I was in high school to take the train from Richmond to Powell Street. There's a big mall there. There's a downtown there. So I would just go by myself.
Yeah.
And you could just hang out, meet new friends. I love San Francisco. Love San Francisco. It's one of my favorite cities on the planet. So I still I still make it a point to go to that BART station. I try to stay near that BART station. You know, San Francisco 7 square miles. You can walk around all of downtown. I don't know if you know this. On O'Farrell, there's an all-night pizza joint that sells deep fried Oreos at 4 a.m. So if you get the craving, yeah, brother, yeah. So, you know, I felt bad because that's a newer thing. Those cats being there, I would say in the last maybe 8, maybe 10 years, them being there yelling at white people with the African Bambaataa fits. Yeah, I said it. They knew what the fuck they was wearing when they left the house. So that whole area is just it's so different now with all the stores leaving and the mall possibly closing. And
I know.
I mean, there's still high-end shopping there. Again, Ricky Pearsall got shot not far from where we're talking about. Walking distance from where we're talking about. So can you still get a $30,000 watch down the street from where we're talking about? Yeah. So it's just that area is a little different. Yeah.
High-end retail that's still there, but it's sort of, and it's going to be made all about crime and disorder. And that's definitely part of it. But then there's also just the death of retail in general and the lack, the whole tech downturn and the just less people downtown as well to potentially, frequent those businesses and such.
I mean, that's still the best Levi's store in America right there.
Oh, in the Westfield Mall?
No, it's not in Westfield. It's outside of it. It used to be right next to.
On Market.
So on Market, yeah. That's still the most badass Levi's store. You can get your own. You can get your own Levi's made there.
Oh shit! All right.
It's very expensive. If you tell me you got your own Levi's made, then I'm gonna tell everybody you're a trust fund, baby.
Definitely have not gotten one.
Steve says, Jason, which blacks do you not have beef with? I don't know. There's a few niggas in my family I'm cool with. Toussaint, Eamon, thank you guys so much. We're going to be going to the Champagne Room. If you guys are patrons, the link is already up. If you want to just watch the show and not become a patron for the Champagne Room, Patreon is letting you purchase one episode. So you can actually just purchase the episode if you want to and watch us talk about hip hop. Chime in if you disagree with my take on Mos Def. I'm sure most of you will because you niggas love him. He's your Jesus. Not me. Not me. Toussaint, this is going to be so mad at me in this. This is the most East Coast West Coast show we've ever done. I'm gonna come out in the Champagne Room like Pac. Fuck Mos Def and the click you claim.
God. It's gonna be bad.
Oh God. Can you imagine all the light-skinned sycophants that love Mos Def getting mad at me in the comments?
Why they gotta be light skinned?
Come on, it's Mos Def.
Damn.
That's crazy.
Only dark-skinned nigga he know is Quali.
Wow.
All right. I'm done. I'm done talking about Mos Def until the champagne room. Get ready. Because I know all of you forgot this Mos Def clip, and I'm going to bring it back so you can watch it and enjoy it with us. And on that note, we are out.
Peace.